Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf Samach Daled. Today's daf is sponsored by Terry Kravosha and Rabbi Chaim Herring in honor of the Aliyah today of their daughter Tamara Davida. May her new life in Israel be full of briut and simcha. Mazal tov. Okay, we're going to get started. We're talking about the different items that are done. If you remember our Mishna, we started about the chatat ha'of and how it was done in the southwest corner. And then we started to say that there were 3 things done on the southwest corner at the top, 3 things done at the bottom, and now we're going to talk about the source for all these things, even though we kind of mentioned the source for these things, for some of them, but we're going to review. Shlosha dvarim. So we're starting on the second line of our daf. There were 3 things that were done at the bottom of the Mizbeach on the southwest side. Chatat ha'of had amaran. So the sin offering of the bird, that we already learned. How did we learn it? So we learned in the previous daf that because it says by the mincha, ki chatat hi, because the mincha is a chatat, we compare mincha to chatat. And since the mincha is brought to the altar on that corner, which we're going to see in a minute where we get that from, even though we learned it already yesterday, from there we learn to the sin offering. Hagashot dichti v'higisha. Now this is a little tricky. They seem to be quoting the wrong pasuk, and Rashi changes it. Okay, well, I don't know if Rashi changes it. Rashi just has different girsa, right? What appears by us is what the printer put in here. But often, when the manuscripts were copied over, sometimes people there were a lot of psukim that are similar to each other, and they specifically brought the pasuk that talks about Hagasha, v'higisha el hamizbeach. But that one doesn't really give you any indicator where to the altar. It could be any corner of the altar. It's actually the pasuk we quoted in yesterday's daf, which actually doesn't mention the word Hagasha. It says, Zot Torah mincha, it's Vayikra Vav, pasuk Zayin, okay, chapter 6, pasuk 7. Hakrev ota b'nei Aaron lifnei Hashem el pnei mizbeach. Remember, we had how could it be also lifnei Hashem and also pnei mizbeach? And that must be the southwest corner. And then we said that's also assuming that the mizbeach is all the way in the north. Then shayarei hadam, the remnants of the remainders of the blood. How do we know that happens at that southwest corner? Dirtiv et kol damapal yishpoch yisod mizbeach. Here also they seem to be quoting the wrong pasuk because that's not the pasuk that says asher petach ol moed. The pasuk that says Asher Petach Ol Moed is the one that says Et Kol Dam Ve'et Kol Hadam Yishpoch. You could see why they made a mistake. It's very similar language and it's in the same chapter. But it says Et Kol Adam Yishpoch El Yisod Mizbach HaOlah Asher Petach Ol Moed. Again, you're inside the Hechal. And then, okay, let's just pull up the map for a minute. We'll use the maps from the Mechana Mikdash here back and forth today. We're going to be using them. They'll be very useful. Actually, let me do it like this. Keep forgetting to share it this way. Okay. Now, if we look at this, so again, you want to come out of the inner sanctuary and hit right into the altar. And again, our map is not so helpful for this because according to our map, the Mizbeach is more in the south. But if the Mizbeach is all the way in the north, you're going to walk out and be right at that southwest corner. Okay? So imagine just moving the Mizbeach over to the center of the room, and then exactly you're going to walk out into that corner. Okay? So that's where we are here. Okay. I'm going to make it smaller so it's not so blurry. Okay. Now, milamala. What do you do at the top? Nisu chamayim v'ayayin. Again, those are these 2 black holes here that you see. They're not far from the black holes of the Yisod, but they're a little bit far. Right? They're not exactly on top of. These are different holes. 2 holes that at the top they would put. In fact, I'm going to show you for a minute, although I don't know why this picture. Okay, I now have access to a whole bunch of different pictures from the Mechana Mikdash. I'm going to show you a picture at the top of the altar here. Okay, this is a good picture. So we're going to talk about this picture later also. Okay, here, let's say you went up the ramp. Here, what we see in this picture is not relevant to our purposes, but it's all different kohanim doing avodot. These kohanim are at the top of the ramp throwing the parts of the korban olah of an animal. Okay, that's not what we're talking about today, but throwing them onto the fire. You see the big smoke coming out. We'll talk about that today from the fire here. That's the Maracha Gdolah, which is on the east side. Okay, the first side you get to when you turn right on the altar. And we have the Maracha Ktana, which we said was the Maracha Ktoret on that side. There's a smaller Maracha in the back. That's the Eish Tamid. Here's the pile of ash, the Tafoach in the middle. We'll talk about that another time. Okay, right, this is where we said there was a little gap. Okay, you could see the gap here. And here on the side, I don't know why they only have 1 in this picture. It's a little bit weird, but this is where you would pour the libations. Okay, so this is, again, if you go around the altar and you turn to the right when you first start and you go all the way around, the last corner you're going to get to is that southwest corner. It's again on the side that's next to the heichal. So there's these cups that they put on top of the holes. It would go into the cup. From there, it would go down into the ground and go through the altar and then down into this pit in the ground. Okay, so now we want to know these three things we did. Lamala, nisuch hamayim v'hayayin, olat ha'of kashi rabba b'mizrach. So the three things you did on the top on this southwest corner. Now this, by the way, here's a kohen who's carrying something to pour the libations into. He's standing at the top. I want to point out that when we talk about the olat ha'of, which is done at the top, it's actually not done with the kohen standing at the top. The kohen stands on the sovev, right, on this ramp that goes. So again, what did we say yesterday? Not the ramp, the ledge. So you have to go up. There's a special ramp on the other side of the altar. Okay, you don't see that in this picture, but on the right side of the altar, when you're coming up, you go, and then that takes you to the ledge, and then you have to walk all the way around the ledge to get to this point. And then we also talked about that there's no ramp that comes down from this side, so you have to go all the way back around and go back the ramp on the other side. Okay, now, so now, three things. Nisuch hamayim, hayayin, and the burnt offering of the bird, but only when there's no room on the mizrach, okay? When it's too busy on the east side, you're really supposed to do it on the east side. That's what we want to find out. Why do you really need to do it on the southeast side? And only when there's too many, we're going to move it to the southwest. But why on the southeast? My taima. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, mipnei shekrova beit hadeshen. Okay, for this we need to go back to the other picture and see what is this beit hadeshen. Okay, so we have here. Okay, if you look here up next to the ramp, to the left of the ramp, on the eastern side of the ramp, it's called the place of the ashes. Okay, this is where we would take the ashes from the top of the altar. We're going to discuss this today. We're going to see it inside how they would do it. And then they would bring them to this beit hadeshen. Now, there were other things they would put in the beit hadeshen, and some of them were one of the things you put there, or a few of the things you put there, come from the olat ha'of, this burnt offering of the bird. You throw some of the parts, like the feathers and the crop and the innards, and you take them and you throw them into the beit hadeshen, and you throw them from wherever you're doing the sacrifice. So we want to be as close as possible to the beit hadeshen. You can see from this map, that's why the maps are much easier to follow than me trying to describe to you in words. So I hope you all have the maps. Like I said, we sent out yesterday links to the WhatsApp groups. If you didn't get them, you can write to us. But if you want to get your own copy, either by mail or by you can get a digital copy, which then you could get immediately and not have to wait for the mail. You can get it directly from a Chon Mikdash. We're not connected at all, but I am mentioning it because I think it's a really, really important, useful resource for learning. So Rabbi Yochanan says, "Mipnei shekrova beit hadeshen." Okay, because it's close to the place of the ashes, so we want you to be there. Now, but sometimes, okay, now remember, when there's no room over there, what do? We go on the other side, and we do it from the other side, and we throw it all the way. Think about it, all the way across the ramp to the beit hadeshen, the place of the ashes. So comes Rabbi Yochanan, he says, Rabbi Yochanan, bo ra'eh kama gadol kochan shel kohanim. How strong were these? Or it's not exactly strong because these weren't heavy parts, but what they're saying is how amazing the kohanim were that they could take she'en lecha kal ba'ofot yoter mimor'ah v'notzah, because the crop and the feather of the bird is super light. Now it's very hard to aim when you're throwing something so light, especially a feather. And look what the kohanim could do. Pa'amim, there were sometimes shakohen zorkan yoter mi b'shloshim amah. The kohen would throw them more than 30 cubits. Okay, now we're going to do some math again, and this is going to be based on the Pythagorean theorem because we're going to make a right triangle and then measure the hypotenuse. Okay, so how do we get to 30, more than 30 amah? Okay, so first we're going to explain. Ditnan. First of all, we have to know how far the beit hadeshen was from the altar. So for this, we're going to bring a Mishna in Tamid, which describes, as I said, we're going to get to describing the Trumat hadeshen, which is the first action they would do early in the morning, before dawn even, when they would start cleaning the ashes from the day before. Natal machtash shel kesef, so they would take a pan of silver, kind of like a dustpan, ve'ala l'rosh hamizbech, and he goes up to the top of the ramp, okay, goes up the ramp in the usual place. Pina, so the first place he gets to is this large white wood pile, the Maracha Rishona, I think they call it, or Maracha Gdola, the big one. Pinata gechalim elach ve'elach. He would move the coals to the side. V'chatam min ha'ma'ukalot ha'pnimiyot. He would take from the ones that were the most burnt. Ve'yored. So he would move aside some of the big coals, take from the inside the real ashes, bring them down. And now you can see why they're there, because the place of the ashes is as close as possible. But you have to go all the way down the ramp first to get there. Okay, because remember, this ramp on the side of the Mizrach only goes up to the Sovev. That's not going to help you when you're on top of the Mizbech, because you're not standing on the ledge. So you go all the way down the ramp. Then, right, they're really spelling this out. Higia la ritzpa, you get to the floor, right, to the ground. Machzir panav klapei safon, you make a U-turn to facing the right. Okay, so you're going to turn around to your left, completely now facing the direction of the right. And you're going to walk along the eastern side of the ramp. How long? Ke'eser amot. About 10 cubits. Okay? Then, then you gather the ashes and you put them in a pile 3 tvachim to the side of the altar. Okay? So now, of the ramp. Makom shenot nimbo, and they're just telling you, and this is relevant for us, this is the place where they would put also mor'ah v'notzah, the crop and the feather of the bird that we're going to talk about, of the burnt offering, and dishun mizbeach hapnimi v'hamenorah. They would also clean out things from the heichal that would go there. Okay, all the ashes and stuff from the menorah, and also from the incense altar. So all that would go into this place of that's why it was called the place of the ashes. It's like a garbage can that they had, but a special one that was in the temple. So now the Gemara says, you got your math wrong, because they said the kohen's going to have to throw out more than 30 cubits. It's actually Hane Tvemi Taltim B'chad Havian. It's actually more than 31. To which the Gemara answers, and in a minute we'll get to this calculation, and we'll see it's 31.14. Mikom Gavre Lo Chashiv. So they say, well, while it's true that if you measure from where the kohen's standing, it's more than 31, but we said more than 30 because we're not counting the body of the kohen. When he throws it, his hand is up, right, and a little distance from his body, so that takes it down about a cubit. Okay, let's go to our measurements, okay? And this from the measurements from before. I didn't sketch out a diagram, but it's not so complicated, nor is it so critical to get all the math, but I thought we'd just talk about it. So it's very easy to measure from the place of the ashes to where the kohen's standing, because you have the 32, the ramp is 32 in length. We're 10 cubits in, so it's 22 till you get to the Mizbech, and another 1 to where the kohen's standing, because the kohen doesn't stand generally where the keren is, right? He's always 1 in. So the kohen's standing 1 in, so that gets you to 23. Again, there are some people who do it a little bit different numbers. The kohen, I think, has a bit of a different. They have 22 by 22, but I think this explanation makes more sense. 23 is, so you're standing at 23, so that's 23 on one side. Now we need to get across the ramp, okay? Across the ramp is going to be 21. How are we going to get to 21? Because if the Mizbeach, remember the ramp is centered in the middle, and the ramp is 16 in length, and the place of ashes is just on the side of that. So he's got to get through the 16 cubits of the ramp. Then there's another 5. How do we get to another 5 to 21? Because the ramp, if you remember, is centered in the Mizbeach, to the altar. So you're going to end up, if the altar is 32, you're going to end up with, or you can really just call it 28 simply, because we already get rid of the Yesod and the Sovev. Those aren't relevant because we're talking about a kohen standing at the top. So it's 28. 28 minus 16 is 12. That's 6 on either side. And again, the kohen standing 1 in. So it's 21. Now, if you do 21 squared by plus 32 squared, you get to, here I wrote this all down. Let me find my notes. But it's like 960. I did the calculation myself. What did I do with it here? Okay, so you get to 970. Okay, 21 squared is 441. 23 squared is 529. That equals 970. The square root of 970 is 31.14. And that's how you get to the number. Okay, take it or leave it. If you didn't follow, it's really not a big deal. So now, it's actually, I think it's kind of funny that the Gemara asks, that the rabbis ask, well, what do you mean it's close to 30, 30, it's really close to 31, because we've often seen that they kind of talk about global numbers and, say more than 30 is also 31 is more than 30. It's not such a big deal either which way. But obviously someone was doing their calculations, which is kind of interesting, and said, wait, this is not right. Okay, now we're going to move on. Kol ha'olim lemizbech. So now we said, everybody who goes up the ramp, goes up to the altar, if you remember in the Mishna, they said, okay, now we have to go back to our map and see. Everyone who went up to the altar, poneh yamin, right? He goes yamin. Okay, let's just read the words in the Mishnah. Olim derech yamin, umikifim v'yordim derech smol. Okay, they go up and they turn right, and that's because we learned kol pniyot shata poneh enu ela yamin. We're always going to turn to the right, which isn't exactly true. Okay, the Ritva actually explains this well. He says that there's two conflicting things. On the one hand, you're supposed to always make right turns. The problem is once you go right to here, you're then turning left to go to the other places. Okay, so he says there's two things. On the one hand, you're supposed to turn right, so that we fulfill when we get up to the top. We go right immediately. So we turn right, the kohen turns right. Then you also have to go around the altar. So that's another way to look at it. Okay, so you go around the altar, and that is the other part of it. Okay, and then you go derech smol, right? You started up going up the right side of the ramp and turned right. On the way back, you're coming from the left side, so you go down left. Okay, other than these things where you go directly up on the left side to that corner, because that's the southwest corner, which is closer to the left side of the ramp. You go up, if you remember the Mishna said, and then you turn on your heels and go right back down. Okay, it's the cases where you don't actually circle the Mizbeach. So now the question is why? Why do you go straight up? Why don't you do what you normally do, which is go up and go all the way around, right? So what if the kohen has to walk a little bit? That shouldn't bother us. So the answer, what are we doing? There's three actions here. There's the libations, which are water and wine libations. Well, what's the problem? Remember our other picture? We saw a picture before, and I'll show it again. Again, all these pictures I got from the Machon HaMikdash. They're very good pictures because they show in action. There's books and all different books, some put out by Machon HaMikdash, some put out by other people, which have lots of different pictures. And if you want to buy one of them, I recommend because it really is very helpful. But I will, in the meantime, share the pictures I have that are relevant. So when you go up, there's a lot of smoke going on up here. This is what I like about it because you really visualize the action and what's happening. So you go up and there's a lot of smoke. Now, when you're carrying wine or water for the libation, the smoke gets into it, it'll ruin it. And then it won't be valid for your offering. So, nisachim, shema yitashnu. Okay, so the nisachim, they might get smoked. Smoke might get in it and ruin them. Ve'olata off, why not the bird? Shema tamut ba'ashan. It might die from the smoke. Right? You bring the bird up there, this bird might start choking on the smoke and die, and then you won't be able to do malika to it. Uriminu. But here's a contradiction. Balola kifat hamizbeach. Okay, now when you want to, this is a contradiction to one of the points we just made. Okay, so they say when the kohen goes up and he's supposed to go around the altar, me'ayin hu matchil, where does he start? Mikeren dromit mizrachit, mizrachit tzfonit, tzfonit maravi, maravi dromit. Okay, that's basically turn right and then go all the way around, as we said before, counterclockwise. Okay? V'notnim lo yayin l'nasech. Now when he gets to this corner, what do? They give him the wine for the libation. Well, this doesn't sound right. What did we say before? If you're going to do the avoda of the nisuch, right, you go up to the corner here and you do it. You don't go all the way around the mizbeach and then they give you the wine. So, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, here he answers the difficulty, turning out I'm a bet. Hakafa beregel. Now, he says the kohen goes around, he does go all the way around. But what? They bring him the wine when he's there. In other words, the kohen goes around and he even says, Amar Rava says, Dai kanami, you can actually infer that from the source, because what did it say? Dikatani, the braita we just read. No, and then this works perfectly, because although we'll see that we're adjusting a little what we thought before. It says they give him wine, right? He goes all around the mizbech, and then they give him the wine. What doesn't it say, right? V'lo katani omrim lo nasech. And it doesn't say there, they say to him, okay, now pour it, now that you're here, but shma mina. So from there it sounds like, okay, so now we have to just modify what we thought. The kohen actually does have to circle the altar. But the person who brings him the wine, and as we now have two kohanim involved in this process, one just brings up the wine and he brings it up the left side and turns left and gives him the wine, and the kohen does the libation right there. Okay? Tov. Now we have a braita about this olim derech yamin and yordim derech smol and all that. And we're going to see now. Tanu Rabbanan. And we're going to see there's a bit of a confusion here with left and right, right? You ever have a conversation with someone and you're talking about left and right and you're not sure who's left and who's right you're talking about? So that's what we're going to have here, or at least a possible explanation to this confusion is going to be from that. Until now, what have we been talking about? From the perspective of the person standing at the bottom of the ramp, they're going to go up on the right, they're going to turn around, right, and then go back down on the left. The left and right, we're talking about from the perspective of the person on the floor going to the altar, okay? So like these guys that are walking up the altar, if they go up on the right, that's this side. If they go up on the left, it's this side, okay? That's what we're talking about. So, by the way, it doesn't really mean that you have to be walking on the right side of the ramp. It just means that when you get there, you're going to turn right. Okay, like you see these guys are actually in the middle, but they're actually not going up to the altar. They're just throwing the parts of the meat onto the fire here. So it could be you're actually walking on the right. It could be, it's unclear, but it does sound like you are walking on the right. V'yordim derech smol, olim derech mizrach, v'yordim derech ma'arav. Okay, this is just saying the same thing in two different ways. And maybe so that you understand, Yamin is east, because that's the side that's parallel. Okay, let's go back to the other map. It'll be more easy to see and follow. So if we go to the map of the temple, you can see, right? This side coming from the Shar Nikanor into the Azarat is the Mizrach, and that's the right side of the altar, is on the east side. And then when you're going down on the west side, which is closer to the Heichal, to the sanctuary. Now it says, Chutz, right? So, chutz min ha'oleh l'shlosha dvarim halalu. Other than the person who's going for these three things, sholim derech ma'arav, v'yordim derech ma'arav. You're going to go up on the on the west, and go down on the west. Okay, for those few things, you're going to basically go on the west side, which is left or right, left, right? Okay, sorry, didn't mean to say it like that. But you're going on the left side. But what does it say here? Olim derech yamin, v'yordim derech yamin. So when it says ma'arav, if this time equates ma'arav with right, that's super confusing. Because ma'arav, we said, was left, because we're talking about the perspective of the guy standing at the bottom of the altar. It's his left side. Super confusing. So the Gemara says, derech yamin, what do you mean? It's not derech yamin, it's derech smolhu, right? You just, above in the braita, you equated ma'arav with left. And now you're equating ma'arav with right. So Amar Ravina Tnei Smol. Ravina says it's just a mistake in the braita. It should say left. But Rava wants to try to say, no, I can make the braita make sense. My yamin de mizbeach. Umay small de gavra. Like I said before, it's all your perspective. When it says, let's start with small. When it says small in the beginning of the braita, it meant the left of the person who's walking up the altar. So there's his right and there's his left when he's looking at the altar. But if you're the altar and you're going and you're looking at the ramp, you're coming from the opposite perspective. And your left is actually the what we said before was the right side of the Mizbeach, and your right is the western side of the Mizbeach. So therefore, when they said Yamin, they meant Yamin of the Mizbeach. From the Mizbeach, it's the right side. Now, why would they do that? We don't really know. And in fact, the Gemara says, V'nitne, the Gemara asks this question, O idi v'idi de Mizbeach, O idi v'idi de Gavra. Right? It was super confusing. Why don't you just say right and left from the perspective of the person, or right and left from the perspective of the altar? Why would you switch in the middle of the braita from one to the other? It's just confusing. To which the Gemara says, Kasha, yeah, it is difficult. Okay, definitely Rava's explanation is difficult. Ravina has a better explanation, which is edited. Obviously, if we prefer never to edit and say, oh, well, we don't know for sure that it's really wrong, but, if you're stuck and you have no choice, so that's what you do. Okay, new Mishna. Now we're going to talk about the chatat ha'of. And we're going to talk about this. We're going to first have a Mishnah about the chatat ha'of. Then we're going to have a Mishnah about the olat ha'of. Remember, chatat is sin offering, and the bird is the burnt offering. These are often brought as a pair. You have a pair of birds for all sorts of sacrifices. One is brought for an olah, and one is brought for a chatat. Usually. So now, sometimes you could have them by themselves. There's unique circumstances, whatever, but we're going to focus right now on how you do it. Okay, for this purpose, I brought, my kids will hopefully forgive me, their favorite duck when they were little. I didn't have a bird, I had a duck, but it's close enough, and we're going to learn today, a little unpleasant, but how they did malika. If you remember, that's the way they slaughtered the birds, right? They didn't do it like they'd slaughter an animal by cutting in the front, okay? But the kohen did it with his thumb in the back of the neck, and we're going to show a machloka between Rav and the braita about how this exactly was done. Hopefully, I will show it in the correct way. It's a little hard to follow, but we'll try our best. Okay, in the meantime, we have chatat ha'of. Ketzad hayta na'aseh. So how would we do the sit offering? We're going to start with that one. Okay, now, the next few words I have in parentheses, I don't know what appears in your Gemara, whether you have them or not. Allah kevesh, you go up the ramp. Upanal savev ubalo keren dromit mizrachit. All of that is wrong because you don't go up and you don't go to the keren dromit mizrachit. You go to the dromit maravit and it's on the floor. You're not at the top. So, and you're not on the sovev. So that's not supposed to be there. It's a mistake. So we're going to skip those words. So ketzad tana aseit hayam. Okay, they don't even tell you where you do it because we just had that in the Mishna before. You go to the keren maravit dromit and you're on the floor. Okay, you don't go up the ramp. What do? Hayamolek et rosho mimul orpa. So you do malika, like we said, with the kohen's finger on the back of the neck. Okay, we don't yet have exactly how we do this, so we're not going to do our show and tell yet. Ve'eno mavdil. Now you don't sever the head. Okay, there's a bit of a difference of opinion what this mavdil and not mavdil is, because we're going to see the olat ha'of, you do mavdil. You do separate it. The Rambam says it means to completely cut off the head. In other words, besides cutting the simanim, the trachea and the esophagus, you completely cut the head off. In the olat ha'of, in the chat ha'of, you don't. Now, this all comes from the pasuk. The pasuk by the chat ha'of says eino mavdil, and the pasuk by the olat ha'of says mavdil. So these are words coming from the Torah. What they are exactly, we don't know 100%, but we'll go with the Rambam. That means you don't completely sever the head. Seems to be the simple reading. Rashi has a bit of a different interpretation about, is it cutting one siman or two simanim, and not necessarily severing the head from its place, but we'll leave that for right now. So whatever it is, you don't do it with this bird. And then how do you do the sprinkling of the blood? Now, it doesn't tell you in the psukim, like the other ones, you put it in a kli, in a vessel, you collect the blood. It doesn't say that you put your finger, right? Taval etzba'o badam, you dip your finger and put it on. So they say, what do? It just says lahazot, you sprinkle the blood. So you mazemi dama al kira mizbeach. You just take the bird, okay, so it's got the head not completely severed, okay, a little unpleasant, and then you just like sprinkle blood from the blood pouring out, you sprinkle it on the wall. Shayarei Adam hayam et matzela yisod. And then there's what's called mitzui hadam, and that also comes from the pasuk. Okay, and then you basically do mitzui, you squeeze the remainder of the blood. Okay, so the first bloods that are coming out, you just sprinkle. The next blood, you do mitzui. Okay, remember, we talked about there's zrika, which is throwing from the vessel. That's not going on here. There's placing, nitina, which you do by putting your finger in the blood and placing it, by putting it really literally on the altar. Then there's haza'ah, sprinkling. This is sprinkling that we usually use. When we say zrika, we often say sprinkling, but it's sometimes throwing. There's also shficha, pouring, right? We don't have any of those here. We have haza'ah, sprinkling, and then we have mitzui, which is squeezing. You squeeze it kind of and like paint the wall with while you're squeezing it out. That's with the remainder. And now, what's interesting about this, normally, let's just compare to a regular chatat sin offering. What do you do with a sin offering of an animal? The meat, it goes to the kohanim, but parts of it get burned on the altar, right? There's the imurim. There's always parts that get burned on the altar. In a bird, no. There's nothing here that gets burned on the altar. Ein lemizbech ela dama. The blood is the only thing that goes on the altar, and that's it. Okay? Kula lekohanim. The rest of this bird now, I take and I give to the kohen. And the kohen, or I'm a kohen, I can eat it if I want. Okay? It gets divided up by the kohanim, everyone, whoever's working there gets some of the thing. This goes to the kohanim, male kohanim. Tanu Rabbanan. So now, that was the Mishna. Now we go to a braita. Hiza midam chatat. Miguf hachatat. So they say, it says in the pasuk, Hizami dama chatat, you sprinkle from the blood of the sin offering. And because it doesn't say in a vessel, right, it just says from the blood of the sin offering, which is coming out of the body. Miguf hachatat. So you do it from the body. That's what we said. Haketzad, how does this work? Ochez barosh ubaguf. So you just hold the head in the body. Umazeh, and you sprinkle. Al kira mizbeach, it says, on the wall of the mizbeach. What does this teach you? Velo al, now they want to say, and not on other walls that are in that room. What other walls are there? Lo al kir kevesh, not on the ramp, the wall of the ramp. Lo al kir hechal, not on the wall of the sanctuary. Velo al kir ulam, and not on the wall of the ulam, the hallway that leads to the sanctuary. Ve'ezeh, so which one? Because the mizbeach has two parts, the upper part and the lower part. Zeh kira tachton, it's on the bottom. So now they want to know, eno el kira elyon, maybe it's the top. What makes you say it's at the bottom? Okay, we said this is a fact, but how do you get that? So now they're going to actually, in the classic Midrash Halakha style, suggest maybe it's actually maybe it's on the top. And logic would state it would be at the top. Why? Well, ma behema she'olata lamata chatata lamala. Okay, the ola of a bird we're going to see goes on the top, and the chatat of an animal goes on the top. So why wouldn't you say off, right? So a behema whose ola is at the bottom, in an animal, the regular ola goes at the bottom, and the chatat goes on top. Right, that's what we know. The chatat on the four corners. So that's the only one that goes above. But the ola is brought below. So of she'ola talamala. So in the bird, when we know the ola goes on top, which we don't know yet, but they're telling us, so wouldn't you then assume that the chatat also goes above? Right? That's the logic. If the ola goes above in the bird, and in a regular animal, the chatat's always above, wouldn't you just assume it goes with the chatat and with the bird, right? We have comparison to bird, burnt offering goes up, and sin offering goes up, so it makes sense. So now they say, Talmud Lomar, but that's how we get it from the Pasuk. What does it say in the Pasuk? V'hanish'ar badam, the remainder of the blood, yimatzeh, will be squeezed el yesod hamizbech. So what do they learn from this to the base? Remember, if you're at the top and you pour it on the wall, it won't trickle down to the base. Why not? Because it'll trickle down to the ledge, because you're standing on either you're standing on the ledge or you're standing at the top and you're doing the blood down. But either which way, the ledge juts out, so it's going to fall down onto the ledge. So it would have to be the way they understand this, even though it's not the simple reading, and we're going to talk about this in a minute. This is talking about the remainder. The remainder, what do? You squeeze on the wall. But they say what this also means is the remainder of the blood that you put on the wall from the first stage of the actual blood that you sprinkled, the remainder of that drips down to the yesod, and that's only going to work if you're on the lower part of the wall of the mizbech, right? So the Gemara says, I don't understand. You're talking. There's two stages. There's the regular blood and there's the remainder. You're using a pasuk about the remainder. The remainder has to trickle down to the yesod. So why don't you just say, the main blood you do at the top, and the remainder you do at the bottom, like a regular sin offering? To which they answer, Amarava, miktiv yimatzeh. This is a grammatical thing. Yimatzeh ktiv. It doesn't say, if it wanted to say, just squeeze the blood onto the yesod, which is how we understood that pasuk, it would say the following, Hanish'ar badam, yimtzeh, or yimatzeh. You will squeeze on the bottom of the altar. But it doesn't say you will squeeze. It says yimatzeh, it will be squeezed, which is passive. Which the way they understand yimatzeh is it will trickle down. And now what they want to say is, even though the topic is remainder, and even though really it does mean you're supposed to squeeze the remainder of the blood onto the wall, they're learning something additional from the fact that they worded it in passive form. They say this means that the other blood is supposed to trickle down to the yesod as well, and therefore it has to be on the lower part, and that's how they get that the chatat's done on the lower part. Okay, now we get to the fun part. Ketzad molkim. Okay, how did they do malika? Okay, maybe not so fun. Amar Mar Zutra Bar Tuvia Amar Rav. So like I said, we're going to have a machloket Rav and a braita. Okay, Rav sometimes argues with Tanaim because there's even a statement about him. Rav Tanu Palik, he has status like a Tana because he's the first Amora and he's a great Amora. Okay, so here's in the name of Rav. Ketzad molkim chatada of. Okay. Basically, what you're going to do is you're going to hold. You take your right hand, you hold. Okay, you're going to now do it like this. The bird is going to be in the palm of your hand. That's the key, because that's where he's going to disagree with the next opinion. Bird is in the palm of your hand. You're going to then take your index finger and your middle finger and hold down the wings, okay? The hands or the wings. Then you're going to take your next two fingers and hold the feet. So basically, in between your second and third finger are the wings. In between the fourth and fifth finger are the feet, and you're basically holding the bird in your palm of your hand. That's the key here. Now, what happens? So let's just read it inside. So 2 fingers there, 2 fingers holding right the hands, the front legs, and 2 holding the back legs. And then you're left with, right, your thumb is there on the back of the neck. You take your thumb, put it on the back of the neck, and you basically, cut the trachea and the esophagus, or one of them, and with your finger. Okay, that's how you do it. But matnita tana, in the braita, they say, sifra milavar. Okay, the bird is not in the palm of your hand, it's on the back of your hand. Okay, so outside your hand. And now, this is a little trickier. According to this, you still, okay, we're going to do the same thing. Your two first fingers are going to hold the wings, okay, or the front, and the two back ones are going to hold that, but it's a little more tricky. Now your thumb, okay, you can see by my hand, it's not exactly close to the neck, and then you're going to have to go around and do it with your neck. So the description is going to be the same, really. Okay, and then you're going to pull, right, the neck by the length of your two fingers. Basically, it's going to go over it, and then you're going to do malika there. Okay, this is not a simple thing to do, as you can see. Okay, it happens my duck is not the most flexible, but still, I imagine most birds aren't either, and my duck is not alive. But if it was alive, you can imagine how more complicated this whole thing would be. And I'm going to put ducky aside for now. Okay, so that's how you do malika. So the Gemara says, Zoe. Now, by the way, there's some other opinions that maybe it's not all done in one hand. Okay, maybe you hold in one hand and do the malika with the other hand. That would be a more logical way to do it. This is quite complicated and not so simple. But anyway, this is the basic reading of it. Okay, Zoe v'tulo. This is an avodah kasha b'mikdash, and there aren't other ones? What do you mean? We know of other ones. You might remember this. Va'ika kmitza v'chafina. Kmitza is not easy, and chafina is not easy. So they say, okay, this is one of the number of difficult avodot in the mikdash. By the way, we mentioned another one today. Kohanim had to sometimes throw the notzah and the morah and all that far, right, when it was pretty light and hard to do. So they had a lot of challenging things. Today seems to be the day of, wow, look at what the Kohanim could do. It wasn't so simple. Okay, just 2 words about kmitza and chafina. What's so difficult about them? So kmitza, we're going to get to this in Menachot, but there's also a lot of kmitzas that they make it petitim, which is they make it like it's crumbly. It's like crumbs, because it's not exactly like a soft dough. And basically the kohen has to put his 3 fingers in and then brush off the sides and end up with exactly a kmitza. Now, if there's crumbly pieces, it's not so easy to brush off exactly what's supposed to go at the edge and what's not knock off also things inside, and also knock off what you're supposed to knock off. These are like supposed to be an exact science here, and it's not so simple to get it to the exact right amount. Then the chafina is when the kohen takes a handful, right? He puts the ketoret in his hands, and that's really not so simple because he has to be holding it in his arm, the vessel that's carrying the ketoret. We talked about this in Yom, and then he has to pour it into his hands. So he's kind of like doing it under his arm and pouring it into his hands, without it spilling, without losing too much, with getting the right amount. These are like exact things that are very hard to do exactly carefully. Okay, next. Mishna. Olata of ketzad nase. Now we're going to see all the differences between the olata of and the chatat of. We already know it's done in a different location, right? As long as, right, there's enough room on the east side, so it's on the southeast side, not the southwest. Olata of ketzad nase. So the other thing, alala kevesh, you go up the ramp. So again, it's not done at the bottom. You go up the ramp. Upanala sovev. So you go up the side ramp and get off that little one next to the ramp on the east side, and you get off on the sovev, and then you're right in the spot. Okay, so if we go back to our picture for a second, you're going to go up because picture makes a lot more sense. So you go up on the right hand side of the ramp, on the next to the ramp on this green little ramp. You get on the sovev, and then you walk to the right. You're basically at that corner. You make a right. You're at that corner. You do it right there on the sovev there. Ubalo lekeren dromit mizrachit. So that's where you get to, that southeast corner. Hayamoleket rosham mimul orpa. Okay, we don't need the map anymore because he's already located there. Now we have to see what he does. So again, he does malika, same thing, but mavdil. He separates the head, and you're going to see why. Well, first of all, like I said, the Torah tells you he does it, but then he's going to do one thing with the head and one thing with the body. I'm going to remind you, an ola, as opposed to the chatat, gets completely burned. So we're going to end up burning the entire thing, as opposed to the chatat of which nothing got burnt, just the blood went on the altar, nothing else. And the kohen even never went up to the altar, right? He never had to do anything on the altar. So now, mitzad damal kir mizbeach. So the first thing he doesn't sprinkle the blood. He squeezes the blood out onto the wall of the mizbeach. Natal tarosh ve'kif beit melikato lemizbeach. So now he takes the head and he goes to the mizbeach, to the top of the mizbeach. Usfago b'melach v'zarko al gabei ha'ishim. Now he pours salt on it. Why does he pour salt? Not for koshering purposes, because we're not koshering this. The salt is al kol korban chat kriv melech. Anything you're sacrificing on the altar needs to have salt on it. So you put salt on it, then you throw it on the fire. Balo laguf. That was the head. Now he goes to the body. He takes out the crop, right? The crop is where it chews up its food. And then the notzan, the feather, remember we saw this, and the b'nei be'ayim, okay, the innards, hayotzim imam, that come out with it, vishlichan lebeit hadeshen. And he basically takes them and he throws them from that spot. That was the throwing we talked about earlier today to the beit hadeshen. Shisa v'lo hivdil. Now he cuts the bird in half, what's left of the bird, slices it in half, but doesn't separate. In other words, he separates the head from the body. He doesn't separate the body completely in half. V'im hivdil kasher, but if he did, it's okay. Okay, it's not a big deal. Sofgo b'melach, again, now he takes the second part, which is not, it's divided in half, but it's not completely separated, puts salt on it, v'zarko al gabei ha'ishim, and he throws that on the fire. Lo hisir hamorah v'lo anotza ve'bnei ha'me'ayim hayotzi bimam. What if he didn't take out the crop? He didn't take out the feather, he didn't take out the innards, or lo sfago b'melach, or he didn't pour salt on it. Koshe yeshno ba me'achar, koshe shina ba me'achar shemitzat dama kshera. Any kind of change he made, as long as he squeezed out the blood, that's all that's important. Everything else is not essential. So you should do these things the way we describe them, but if you don't do it, it's okay. Hivdil b'chatat v'lo hivdil ba'olah pasul. If you separated the head in the chatat and you didn't do it in the olah, it's disqualified. In other words, they do say that one important part that is essential besides the blood is either the head separating or not separating, whichever one goes with, right? The chatat doesn't need separating, the olah does. If you didn't do it, you did it wrong, it's a problem. Mitzad damarosh v'lo mitzad damaguf psula. If you squeezed out the blood of the head but not the blood of the body, it's disqualified. However, the reverse, mitzad damaguf v'lo mitzad damarosh kshera. But if you did the mitzoi, the squeezing from the blood of the body and not the head, that's okay. Which basically means, in other words, in simple terms, the critical element is the squeezing of the blood from the body of the bird, not the head. Even though you do it from the head, the critical element is the body. If you didn't do it, it's a problem. If you did do it and you didn't do the head, it's fine. Now we're going to have a good review of the beginning of our Masechet, because now we're going to say that now we're talking about birds. Until now we've been talking about animals. Now we're going to say that all the laws we learned about lishma and lo lishma, chutz l'mkomo, chutz l'zmano, pigul, all that is true for birds. So this next section is total review of Mishnah, what we've seen earlier in the Masechet. Remember the beginning. Chatat that's lo lishma is disqualified. And other than that, in the Pesach Bismano, nothing else is disqualified for lo lishma. So that's what we're going to see here too. Chatat ha'of shemelaka shelo lishma. Now remember, the slaughtering for the bird, it's malika. So if you do malika with the wrong intent for a different korban, or mitzad dama shelo lishma, or you did the squeezing of the blood, which is the same as rikat adam, right? Shelo lishma, for the sake of a different korban, or you did it lishma v'shelo lishma, partially lishma and part of the action you did shelo lishma, or shelo lishma v'lishma, or you started lo lishma and then you went to lishma, psula, it's disqualified because it's a chatat. Chatat shelo lishma is disqualified. Ola ha'of kshera, but if you did it for an ola, it's fine in the bird. Ubavad shelo atal ba'alin l'shem chova, but just like the first Mishnah, but the owner is not going to be yotzei, they're not going to fulfill their obligation because the korban wasn't done lishma, but you would continue sacrificing the rest of it because it is a fine korban. Echad chatat ha'of, echad chatat ha'of. Okay, now we're talking about the sin and the bird and the burnt offering. They're the same, right? In lo lishma they were different, but they're the same for laws of pigul. V'shemitzat dama le'echol. So if you either slaughtered it, shemelakan, or mitzat damam, where you sprinkled the blood, with the intent, le'echol davar sh'darko le'echol la'atir, davar sh'darko la'atir. Remember all this? To eat something that normally was eaten, or to burn something that's supposed to be burned, but you say, I'm going to do it chutz l'mkomo, outside the place where it's allowed. Pasul ve'im bo karet. It's disqualified, but there's no karet, because it's not chutz l'zmano. Only chutz l'zmano has karet. Chutz l'zmano, pigul v'chayavim alav karet, but with one condition, you're only going to be chayav karet, first of all, for eating it, and when, not for doing the pigul thought, but for eating it. And when you can be chayiv for eating it, only if as long as the rest of it was sacrificed properly. What does that mean? Ketzad, again, total repeat of a Mishna we had. Karav amatir k'mitzvato, as long as everything else was done properly, and only one, right, and you did pigul like this. So malak b'shtika, you did the malika fine with no particular thought that was messing it up. Umitzadam chutz zmano, and then while you were squeezing the blood, you thought, I'm going to burn it outside its time, or I'm going to, something like that. Or I'm going to eat it outside its time. Or you did the malika outside the time, and then you squeeze the blood without any kind of intent. By the way, we're talking here about the ola, the squeezing, because by the sin offering, the squeezing is the remainder. That wouldn't be pigul. It would have to be the hazayah, the sprinkling. Either which way, it's one or the other. So again, you did malika chutz mano, and then mitzah hadam with no words at all, or you did both malika and mitzah hadam with chutz mano thought. That also could create pigul. If it's pigul all the way, that's also pigul. As long as you did the blood, you did them wrong, but you did it. And here we'll finish. What would be a case where it's not done properly? That it wouldn't be pigul if you ate the meat later. If you mixed while slaughtering, you did outside of space, and when you did the blood, you had outside the time. Machshava. Or the reverse order. Remember, there was a debate about that in the previous, but here we're just quoting the main opinion. Or you did both of them outside its place, well, then there's no karet. Okay, that's for right now. We're going to stop here. We're going to continue with this Mishna tomorrow. So what we did today, talk about the sources for where these things occur, why they occur on the southwest corner, why we do the olat ha'of on the southeast corner, so it's close to the beit hadeshen, right? Even though sometimes we do it on the other corner. Why we don't want that? Why when we go up, we want to go straight up to there, so the libations and the bird don't die or get ruined. Then we talked about the how we do the chatat oath, how we do the olat oath, what are similarities, what are differences, and how malika is performed. With that, we finish for today, and the fact that all the laws of lishma, lo lishma, pigul, all that apply just as well in the same way that they applied in the animal sacrifices. With that, we finish. Wishing everyone a good day.